Now, I'd now like to call on Andrew Robb, who chairs the Coalition Policy Development Committee, but of course has an even more important role as a director of the MRC. Andrew.
Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I have got the task of summarising the day in 10 minutes, so I might gallop a little bit. But it has been an outstanding day, I think, and I really am grateful, as has been expressed, to all the contributors, and especially grateful to Julian Leeser. He's a fellow who has brought so much to the centre. He's a delight to work with, highly professional. He's a doer. These things happen. No tantrums, no bother. Very effective. He's been a great leader, not only at the centre but within the broader party. We're in politics here. The colleagues here, we're all in politics to improve and protect the community. And really at the heart of that is policy. You don't take people from A to point B without a series of policies. You've got to be able to implement them, but you've got a series of policies. And that's what today is all about, to see whether the sort of policy construct we took and the directions we took to the last election, what do we have to do to those to make them relevant to the next 10, 20, 30 years. And I did think today that we have been alerted, if you like, to a series of trends that have been emerging and a series of developments which suggest if we're not at a turning point, we're at least at a point where, a point in time where we do need some different policy approaches because of some of these trends and some of these developments. There are several just quick observations or points that were made today that I thought captured some of those areas where we need perhaps a new policy approach or that will influence new policy approaches. The first one is with the extensive globalisation in the 70s, really when capital started to move around the world in real time for the first time, it prompted a whole lot of other productivity improvements. The floating of the dollar and the financial sector and the labour market reforms, and it went on and on through most sectors. In many ways, I think they were sort of low-hanging fruit. They weren't easy, but they were more obvious, and you could take a political argument to the community more easily to convince them of the need to support these significant changes. I think, as was said today, people over the last decade have lost the appetite for reform. Things have been going well. We've been enjoying the benefits of all of that 20 years of productivity reform. And I think what came through today was this notion that not only have they lost the appetite, but it's been replaced with greater and greater regulation, this attempt to regulate risk out of our community. And it's so obvious in every area that we go to, especially in terms of governance, the endless and mindless reporting and thing that has just burgeoned in the last few years. Now, I think that tells us that we're now, in the next 10 years, we've got to steel ourselves as politicians for the harder productivity areas. And one thing with the link with science and technology, that was a great contribution today, because it is probably one of the areas where, with some greater focus and greater effort, we can in fact gain some significant productivity improvements and really take what is a great sector, you know, to even higher levels to deal with this problem that we've got. The second observation, from a demographic point of view, the first of the baby boomers reached retirement age this year, and it's a wake-up call in a way for all of us. We've known it's happening, it's a lot of talk about it, but the fact is we're here now in real time. The first of the baby boomers have arrived, and that's going to have very significant consequences for policy point of view, and I know it wasn't lost on me that for all the politicians, we're going to have a whole lot of people in their 60s and 70s who are going to drive us mad with causes, but also that associated demographic trend of the 30s, people in their 30s and housing affordability, that they will dominate policy, as will the 65 to 75s. So we've got to look again with the lifestyle changes and the policy implications out of those two areas. Again, because politics is about dealing with priorities and it's about taking people with you. So if you're not dealing with the major problems, the major trends, the priority concerns out there, you're not successfully governing, and perhaps you're not even governing. The third thing I thought was a very significant observation was that the greater divergence of economic growth is becoming a greater convergence between the developed and the developing world. Again, been obvious, but when you put that way, you see that it does have implications for policy, and it is changing dramatically. With China, 10% growth a year, less than 10 years, and they've doubled the size of their economy. And we happen to benefit from that. Other countries, a lot of the other developed countries, as it was explained to us, are being penalised by that because of the competition. They're in the same space, whereas we've got the resources that China and India need. So it does mean that there is going to be a significant and fairly longer-term demand for resources and food. The two things which have, through all of our developed life as a country, have been the mainstays. They're our strengths. They're the things we do best. And as some speakers have suggested, there's always this temptation of the grass is greener and we've got to go somewhere else and rely on something else. I saw it in the high-tech bubble era very personally in business, and there is a psychology but we should go back to our strengths, and we've been reminded of that today very strongly. The fourth one was that the world economy will be far more volatile and uncertain. Because of China and India, because of the convergence, the previous observation, a lot of these countries in Western Europe and the United States, they are in competition with China and India. We benefit from it, but because they're in competition, they've got such problems with fiscal policy and the level of debt and all the rest, it does mean, as was said today, there'll be more shocks, and shocks by definition, there's no warning. Now, I think the point is we are still a small, open, vulnerable economy. We've got the great benefit, but what I got out of this was that we have to be very alert to maintaining our resilience so when shocks come, we can sail through them. We can actually hold our own and not be dragged down. We saw at the GFC, as soon as we get an economic shock, you get a collapse in commodity prices. If we get another one, it'll happen. We need to be able to sail through it and come out the other end and pick up where we left off. Now, that's got a lot of consequences for how much public debt we have, the whole issue of what sort of reserves, what sort of surpluses, how quickly we get back to that situation. At the moment, if you look at the real structural deficit, not just the actual deficit, we're not going to get back into a real surplus until about 2020 at the earliest, which means we don't start paying off debt, the $100 billion nearly of debt. Until that point in time, we could be at least 15 or 20 years away before we start to generate real surpluses in our system. So the theory and the advice given to us today could be a long way away, and the resilience we had just 3 years ago may be a long time before we can restore that. So again, in terms of convincing the public, there's a story here we've got to take to them, and there's policies we've got to match to deliver that. I suspect I'm getting close to time. I'll just make one more point. The implications of the demographic change and the population growth, I thought this whole notion of the need for significant decentralisation, but even what was called a patchwork development, it's almost decentralisation within a big city itself. Again, I think there's a lot of very important public policy issues there, and I think perhaps the quote for the day that struck me the most was this notion that no mayor in a whole series of country towns that we know the towns are running backwards. He hadn't met a mayor, I think it was Paul said this, who said, "My town's static or declining, and isn't it fantastic?" You know, so in other words, it's got implications for immigration policy, got implications for what we do in decentralisation, how we do bring some critical mass to lots of areas of population growth. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. At last, it's Tony. If Tony would wind up for us. Thank you.
Tom, I think it has been a marvellous day, and like Andrew, I'd like to congratulate you and Julian and all the members of the board of the Menzies Research Centre, but I'd particularly like to congratulate and thank all of the presenters today. I think we've been very lucky with the quality of the presenters. I think all of them have given us something that was challenging. You did save the best for last, though. Tom, thank you for that. Those plaudits for the Howard government. The Howard government, I think praise had been measured at best until that time of the afternoon. But look, it was a terrific day. One of the problems with being in politics is that you spend an enormous amount of time attending to the necessary and the urgent. But the necessary and the urgent rarely involves serious intellectual sustenance or leisured contemplation of very important subjects. And I think we have been, those of us who've been here throughout the day, had the pleasure and the stimulation of somewhat leisured contemplation of big issues, stimulated by some very thoughtful and well-informed speakers. So it has been terrific. I hope, Saul, that we can really do something about productivity. And I think the best way to continue strong productivity growth in the Australian population is never to ban the use of mobile phones in motor cars, because I tell you what, how many of us do how much of our business in motor cars on mobile phones? And the idea of banning that in the name of safety is just outrageous. I mean, it would be almost like making motor cars drive around behind a bloke with a red flag. I think that we had a terrific presentation from Bernard Salt. And Bernard, please keep attacking the Greens, because they're the only people who want a zero immigration or 70,000 a year immigration. I think that all of our science speakers were very interesting and stimulating. And look, the great thing about our culture is its unquenchable curiosity. And the great thing about Australians is that we never discuss anything without getting into an argument, but 99 times out of 100, the argument stays friendly. And good to see you three experts on science policy disagreeing so heatedly but so amicably up the front. Well done, everyone. It's been a good day. This is just the start of an intellectual smorgasbord which is going to be offered to you over coming months and years from the Menzies Research Centre. If you've enjoyed today, please make sure you come again to future forums.
This is the very last word. Thank you to all our speakers. Thank you for all of you for coming and listening. Thank you particularly to the senior members of the Shadow Cabinet, the members of Parliament and senators. This is for you, and we've appreciated your attention. I'd like to thank particularly Julian. I do the talking, he does the work, and he has done a fabulous job. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Huawei, and thank you very much. And I'd like to now announce that on the 11th of April in Sydney, 14th of April in Sydney, we will have our next seminar on productivity. It does not yet have a sponsor, and we look forward to that. And we look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you very much.